welcome. My name is Dana Zivkovich. I am the organizer of the Friendly Lawyers Association. We are a group that was organized as a collaborative social network for small firm managing lawyers. And we do things that can help you succeed in your practice. We offer education. We offer, well, it's a little bit harder since quarantine and COVID, but we were facilitating reasons to get together in person. Now we try to do those things online. And we try to bring you law practice management tips, topics, and now webinars to help you. A couple little housekeeping notes about this webinar. We are going to run for an hour to get the CLE credit. We do usually stay a few minutes longer, 5-10 minutes, if anybody has questions that they still want to raise to the speaker. We have a chat box on the right-hand side, and we encourage you to use it not only for questions, but we will also be asking you to comment and give us your thoughts. It really helps make for a more engaging presentation, and I think it helps people hear what other experiences that they've had. It helps them to maybe relate to or think of other ideas. So please do use the chat box, and I'll be encouraging you to do so. So now I'd like to tell you that I'm happy to welcome Melanie Leonard for today's webinar. She runs Streamlined.legal, and if you haven't heard of Streamlined.legal, it is a company which was organized to help firms get the most out of their practice management software. She's going to be talking about how to use systems to automate your practice and to make things run more efficiently. And Lord knows I need that. I'm sure there are some people out there that could also benefit from these tips. So with that, I'm going to bring her up to the screen and let her get started and just welcome you to the show.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
There we go.
Here I am. Thank you so much for having me, Dana. I appreciate it. And it's my pleasure to be here with the Friendly Lawyers today. I want to talk to you guys a little bit, or I should say a lot, about automation. It's a topic that is near and dear to my heart. And I want to make sure that we are thinking about our firms in a way that can really help us to automate them and see the benefits of automation. So I'm going to start here just with a quick little video so that we all have the same background, and we'll go ahead and get started with that. So what Henry Ford was famous for, of course, was that moving assembly line, and I'm sure you saw it in there. There was a lot of automation in there, not just the moving assembly line, but you may have seen the chair that the worker was swinging back and forth away from the car and then to the car and away from the car. The machinery that was screwing on the exact same bolt every single time, every single movement. And so that's kind of what we think about when we think about automation in the automotive industry or in the industry. But what we don't always think about is the effect effect that that had on the American culture. And so not just are we talking about all the great things that Ford is advertising, of course, in that commercial, but we also think about what it was like back in the day when that assembly line first came about. Because the reality is that back then, the workers in car factories were being paid approximately $2 a day, and they were working like 9-hour shifts. Well, when Henry Ford was able to bring out this assembly line, he was able to increase wages to $5 a day, which was in most cases more than double what workers had been paid. And he was able to, at the same time, reduce their hours from 9-hour shifts to 8-hour shifts. And so obviously that had a big impact on the workers. In fact, after he announced that, 10,000 people showed up the next day at the Ford plant wanting to get jobs. So it was obviously a big effect on the workers, but exponentially, it also had an effect on society as a whole, because what happened was now the workers in that factory were not even, not just able to get better jobs, but now they could actually afford the cars that they were building. Up until that point, cars had been such a luxury and such a luxury purchase that even the people working in the factory couldn't afford them. But now with this, the new wages and the new automation that Henry Ford had put into place, it really did open up the country, because now the workers could afford the cars. The cars could now be used to open up this society, because now we didn't have to just rely upon the stores or the things in our local area. Now we could get in the car and drive to wherever we needed to. And so he's credited with creating a whole new middle class with the invention of that moving assembly line. And so what we want to talk about today is how does that relate to the legal industry? Much like automation was credited for making that whole new middle class and providing opportunity where it wasn't there before, I believe we can do the same thing within the legal field by using automation. And so I want to take a look, just like, where did the assembly line start from? I want to look a little bit at where did the legal field come from and how did we get to the point where we're at today? It's no surprise that the billable hour is still alive and well, but where did it come from? How did we get there? And so just as a little background, back in the 1950s or before the 1950s, attorneys were actually charging using fixed fees. And the ABA and different bar associations and courts would put out fee schedules, and you were not allowed to go above that fee schedule. And so the reality was that until that was outlawed for antitrust violations in the 1970s, that's really what attorneys were looking to. And timesheets really weren't a thing back then. We weren't tracking our hours necessarily. It really became more popular in the 1950s through the 70s that we as attorneys would start billing our time, or I should say tracking our time. And the reason that came about was really an accounting tool. It was used to see how productive attorneys were. So they were measuring the time to compare to the fee to figure out how much productivity there was, and if we could increase that productivity by making things happen faster, easier, or better. So it really was not intended to be a pricing method at the beginning. But as you all know from tracking time, for those of you that are doing hourly work, once you start looking at your time from an hourly perspective, it starts making you value your time in an hourly perspective. And so now we start getting to the point where the 1970s come about, this antitrust litigation does away with all those fee schedules, and now we're looking for another way to price our services, and then the billable hour came very naturally out of that time tracking. And so what happens is that we're essentially now selling our time when we're billing hourly. And what happened was that made that inaccessible for a lot of people, because it can be very hard to ascertain. It can be very uncertain. How long is my divorce going to take? How long is my corporate formation going to take? As a client, I've never had a divorce before. I've never formed a corporation before. I really have no idea. And so that became very, very overwhelming to some people. And as an attorney, the argument is, well, I don't know how long the divorce is going to take either. And it's true, we don't, but we do have a better feel, right? So if it's contested, it's going to take longer. If we have to do this type of motion, it's going to take longer. So we are in a better position to give that information to our clients, but the billable hour does make that a lot less certain. And the billable hour also was rewarding the slower or less efficient attorneys that didn't have much of a process or had a slower process. And so what happened is the result of all that, or part of the result, is that now we have in the US what we call an access to justice gap. And if you listen at all to Jack Newton of Clio, the CEO of Clio, he talks a lot about this access to justice gap, where we have a lot of attorneys doing some really awesome work, and we have a lot of people that need legal help, but we're not always able to meet in the middle there. In fact, there is a study that has been done. It was back in 2017, and I'm going to go ahead and show you that slide here. Not that slide. We're going to look at this one. So this access to justice gap, back in 2017, the Legal Services Corporation did a study and found that 86% of civil litigation problems reported by low-income Americans in the prior year received inadequate or no legal help. And if you looked at the Clio Legal Trends report that they put out every year, you'll see there are a lot of different reasons for that. But the reality is that there is a big need, and there is or rather the business opportunity is that there is a big market. And there's a big market of people out there that have legal problems that are not getting legal help. And so I think that that's one of the areas that we can look at automation.
Whoopsie. Okay, sorry.
I saw you pop in.
I clicked the wrong button. Yeah, I popped in and I didn't mean to scare you, but I just wanted to ask you a question along those lines. You know, whenever statistics come up, I think it's natural for any of us to be like, well, wait a minute. What about this? What about that? Mm-hmm. And, you know, access to justice and kind of this statement that you made about there's a business opportunity there. I mean, just to clarify, are you saying that there's a business opportunity to get low-income clients?
I think there is a business opportunity to get low-income clients, but I also think there's a business opportunity to provide services in a different way so that they can become more affordable to people that even aren't low income, maybe they're mid-level income, right? But they're feeling like the traditional law firm model is out of reach. Right, because that billable hour is so intimidating for exactly for a lot of people. A lot of people, and frankly, whether they can afford the fees or they can't afford them, if they have the perception that they can't afford them, then that's our real challenge, right?
So that's an interesting question, yes, about changing how you deliver that message and how you can create efficiency behind the curtain.
Correct. So the question, and we can approach it many different ways. One of the ways is to make the billable hour more efficient so that we are able to help more clients that can afford it or feel like they can afford it and get that message across. But another option then is to also look at how we're offering our services. Do we want to offer them in a billable manner or an hourly manner, I should say, or do we want to offer them in a flat fee manner or a graduated scale or there's a lot of different options, obviously. So the point is simply that by using automation, and we're going to talk more about how to do that, but by using automation and systemization of our firms, by doing that, we now have the option to be looking at different business models, whereas before it may not have felt as possible as a business owner to be able to provide these kind of services. If we look at how we're providing the services, the systemizing, the automation, then now we can seriously consider different types of business structures or different types of service offerings that now maybe can appeal to someone at a lower income bracket. Absolutely.
Gotcha.
And
now we do.
At the same time, still being a profitable business. I mean, I'm not suggesting necessarily that we go out there and offer all pro bono services. That's not at all what this is about. What it's about is being able to recognize how we can structure our businesses to take advantage of that market and be able to serve that market and still be profitable at the same time.
And we do have a little poll for the viewers that, Melanie, would now be a good time to
that sounds great. Yeah, let's
send forth that poll. Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and publish it. And so please let us know your thoughts, where you're at with the question, does your firm have procedures? And I'll go ahead and share with you, Melanie, that actually my background is with corporate management before I ever went to law school. And when you work in a corporate setting, there's a lot of papers, a lot of procedures. And so I kind of came to law really respecting that process. And so I have the answer, yes, they're documented, reviewed, and updated regularly.
Nice.
But in a weird way, it's because I enjoy doing that. I don't know if that's the common response. I suppose we'll find out soon.
Yeah, I agree with you that that is a more unusual answer, simply because, frankly, if you aren't in a situation where you have that corporate experience, because you're right, it's pretty common in corporate America, or at least in larger companies, to have that, and they recognize the value, but we don't learn that in law school. Maybe you went to business school before you went to law school, something like that. Some attorneys are in that situation, which is fantastic. But by and large, I'd say most attorneys, especially those that own their own law firm, don't necessarily have that exposure and don't necessarily have that same appreciation. So a lot of times it's something that, maybe it happens, maybe it doesn't. If it does happen, maybe it doesn't happen as thoroughly as we'd like.
Right. I completely agree with you. That's been my experience as well.
Yeah.
I'm going to end this poll, and hopefully the results will publish to everybody who's watching. But if they don't, I'll just let you know that the majority of our viewers are really good at this.
Yeah.
So happy to report that most of them have procedures. They're documented, reviewed, and updated regularly. And then a third of them say they have procedures, and they are all very safely stored in my head.
That's one of my favorite responses, frankly, because this is a no judgment zone. I've been there and done that too. I mean, I have more procedures in my head, at different points in my business than I do on paper sometimes. And so what happens is we understand the value of having a procedure, which is fantastic, and we save all that in our heads, and then that makes it that much harder for anyone to help us, right? Because it's all stuck in our brains. And that's the situation where you find people saying, well, I wanted to train this person, or I wanted them to help me, but it was faster to do it myself than to train them. And it's like, well, yeah, that one time it probably was, maybe even 2 times. But if you really want someone to help you for any significant period of time, you're going to have to invest that energy and time to be able to train them. And whether you're training them, one-on-one, or whether you're training them by saying, here's a written manual, please read it, or here are some videos, please watch them, and then we can discuss them. There's all kinds of ways that we can do that. But I think the real key here is the more that you can document them, the more successful they're going to be, because then other people can access them without you having to be individually one-on-one with them all of the time. So we're going to talk a little bit more about kind of how to document them, where to document them, stuff like that. But I'm glad to see that, this group is on the right track, which frankly isn't surprising to me. It gets a little bit of, if you weren't interested in the topic, you probably wouldn't have shown up to begin with. So, but I'm still glad to hear it and glad to see it. So thank you for sharing that poll with us. Excellent. So the idea here that we're talking about is that, much like Henry Ford, went ahead and started using that automation to really revolutionize his industry, I think that the same thing can be done within the legal industry. And I think that it only needs to start with your practice. We're not talking about going out and changing the whole world necessarily. I think that if we take a look within our own practices, then we can really start to see the benefits and how that can affect not only us, but then the clientele around us. And so again, this doesn't mean that we have to do pro bono work. That's not at all what I'm getting at. What I do think it means, though, is it's an opportunity for us to rethink our business models. And if we're just doing hourly billing, because that's what we've done for a very long time, I think we're missing an opportunity. So it's definitely something that I think that we can still make money and at the same time serve a population that isn't being very well served currently. And so that's where I think one of our biggest opportunity lies. So one of the biggest factors I think in making this all happen and this idea is the automation and systemization that is required to run effective automation. This is a tongue twister today, because here's the reality. You can't bring automation to a firm where everyone is doing things differently and expect it to be effective. And so just like the assembly line that we saw in that video, if each person is, one day they're using this kind of bolt, the next day they're using a different kind of bolt, or on one side of the car they're painting the car this color, on the other side of the car they're painting it another color, that's not going to work. If everyone's doing things differently, it's not going to make your automation run well. And so it's very important that the underlying idea behind automation is that systemization. We have to have things working consistently and consistently well in order to make that automation go really well. And so a lot of times the argument that I get from people is, well, I don't want to run a factory. My law firm is not a factory. In fact, we want to provide very specialized and very bespoke services to our clients and make sure that they're well taken care of. And I absolutely agree. And I want to serve clients well as also. However, I think that's based on an assumption. And the assumption that we're making when we say that is that because it's a system, we can't have high quality or specialized individual attention. And I absolutely disagree with that. And as an example, I'd like to point your attention to the idea that it exists in this world already. And what I'm talking about is systemization within within the food and drink industry, right? So if we're talking about systemizing, we're all familiar with McDonald's. I hope you've all seen the movie about Ray Kroc and everything. Great movie, you should see it. But what we find is that in McDonald's, it is very systematized. The fry guy is going to stand in the same place no matter what McDonald's you go to in the whole world. It's going to be just system after system after system. And the result is I get the exact same burger every time. And sometimes I want that burger. I want that consistency. If I'm driving across the country and I'm too nervous to stop at the little mom and pop sandwich shop, I know what I'm going to get from McDonald's. I know how it's going to make me feel. I know what to expect from it. And sometimes that consistency is what I want. Now, the flip side of that is sometimes I don't want that. Sometimes I want the fine dining experience. Sometimes I want the specialized drinks. In that case, I'm not going to go to McDonald's, right? I'm going to pick something else. So another very systematized service that we see out there is a Starbucks. For those of you that have been to the Starbucks, similar kind of thing. Starbucks, the machines are set up exactly the same in all the stores. The person who's pouring the drinks is going to stand in the exact same place. And so they're also very systematized. But the difference there at Starbucks is that there's not just 5 different sandwiches. You can get your drink in about 400 different combinations with 10 different ingredient combinations. And so the idea is that I can still go to Starbucks, have it very systematized, but get the exact kind of drink that I want down to the size, what kind of ingredients are in it. And so the idea is I can use a system to also create a very specialized service. And so that's what I'm really looking to do with our law firms. I'm looking to promote the idea that we can be systematized, but also have that enable us to provide a much better and more consistent, high quality service to our clients. Because the reality is that we can use that system to improve our services. So here's what I see happening in law firms a lot today. So oftentimes I will see, let's take intake for an example. So I've got a new client calls the firm, the receptionist answers. The receptionist, of course, is in the middle of doing 15 other things. And so she's a little overwhelmed because she wears a lot of hats also. And so she starts talking to the client because she wants to, help the client. And she gets a lot of information about the client's situation. And then she does whatever process. Maybe she forwards them to the attorney. Maybe she tells them we'll call them back, whatever we do. But what often will happen is because we don't have a very distinct process, that information that the client shared in that very first phone call doesn't always make it to the attorney or to the person doing the consult or to the person drafting the documents, a week and a half later. And so we end up having to contact the client again and ask for a lot of the same information. And I'm sure you guys have had this experience. It happens regularly. And the idea is that it makes the client frustrated, right? It's not a very good experience for them. And it makes us frustrated too, I'm sure, because we don't want to have to do that, right? We prefer to just gather all the information and get what we need to do done. So the reality is that that's a pretty common occurrence in law firms. The difference is if we built in a system that could accommodate that, then it would be a much better experience, not only for us, but also for our client. So if instead the receptionist was answering the phone, we know she's wearing a lot of hats, so we instruct her to transfer that call to somebody else. That somebody else is sitting in front of a computer where they're taking down various copious notes that will be shared across the firm as that client progresses through our firm. And so now we can use that information because it's recorded and documented everywhere where everybody knows where to find it. And so now we can continue to use that same information throughout the case and not have to go back to that client and repeat things and try and get more information. And so that's going to be an example of how a more systematic approach can actually offer our clients a better experience. And that's just the beginning, of course. That same theory can be persist throughout our whole representation of our clients.
Melanie, we lost you. I don't know if you can. Oh, okay, there you are. Thanks.
Sorry, I'm here.
We heard you, but we lost you. So just a quick technical glitch, but we're good.
Okay, good. So that's just one example, of course. The idea is that we can use that throughout the entire experience of working with our client and build systems that, number one, they have less human error if we're documenting all this stuff and doing it the same way each time and everyone knows how to do it. Things aren't being missed. Things aren't falling through the cracks like they can sometimes. It helps us quickly identify files that need more attention. When your systematic tasks are being done regularly and consistently, that gives you more opportunity and time to focus on the people that don't fit into that process and focus on the people that do need help. So for example, if I know that, every time we file a motion for modification of child support, we do the exact same 15 things. We get information from the client, we draft it, somebody reviews it, somebody finalizes it, we take it over to the court, or we file it electronically more likely. We follow the same steps. So now me as an attorney, I can say, okay, I know that motion is taken care of. I know when I say, let's do this motion, it's going to happen in a number of days, every time the same way. I don't have to worry about it. I don't have to think about it. I have my small part of reviewing it, and that's it. So now I have a lot more time to be able to talk to the client that is particularly worried, or talk to the client that is particularly concerned, or whatever the situation is. But my system can identify those types of people earlier and can get me to intervene earlier, because now I have the time to do that because I wasn't trying to recreate the wheel every time we're trying to do this motion that we do with regularity.
Okay, so I do want to come in and kind of ask you, because it sounds like, well, number one, you're making a good case for reasons why anybody would want to be interested in automating. But I think what comes to my mind is that, if you've got a staff and then having written procedures, sure, that's one thing. Getting everyone consistent, having your system structured on paper where everyone's kind of following the same things, and then you coming back to that and tweaking it as necessary. But what about the solo shop, or someone who is doing everything in their own office? I mean, in what ways can that person automate, or what would they be relying on to help them automate because they don't have people to do that?
Yeah, so I think that when we're in a solo situation, the effects of the automation that we put into place can be that much bigger, right? Because it's going to save us time that we otherwise wouldn't have, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the reality is, to make that automation work in that way and buy us that time that we're looking for, we still are going to have to be systematic about things. So for example, if I set up an automation that says, okay, every time I talk to a new client on the phone, I want to have my engagement letter automatically prepared and sent out to the client, right? So there's technology that exists that allows me to do that. But if I don't ever go to that technology and put in the person's name, or put in the person's email address, or do the things to tell or trigger the technology to work, it's not going to happen.
Okay, so I'm hearing you say, just to confirm, that not only are there technology tools that you're talking about, but you're really saying write yourself and be disciplined to a plan that you have written. So written procedures even for yourself.
Correct.
So that you can develop that habit.
Exactly. So it's not only developing a habit and being, like you said, disciplined enough to do it, but depending on what your goals are, if you are a solo looking to grow, then that could be a situation where that could happen very quickly, that you need help. And that's not the time that, when you're scrambling to get help, is not the time that you want to be documenting procedures, because you're going to miss something, or not think of something, or not have time to do it. So the idea is that the sooner we can get those documented, the more they can help you in the future. Now, let's say that you're not looking to grow. I mean, you're perfectly happy being a solo. You just want to take advantage of the automation. That's fantastic. It may be less important for you to document it, but it's still going to be as important for you to be disciplined about it. Because if you're not disciplined about it, the software won't work. I mean, that's just the nature of software, sure. And that's how technology works. So
if you don't exercise frequently, you will not lose the weight.
Correct,
right?
Correct. So that if you're not telling the technology how or what to do, it's just going to sit there. And frankly, that happens a lot. I mean, I work with a lot of firms that buy technology because they recognize it's a good idea and they should be using it and it's going to help them, but they don't take the time or energy either to learn it or to use it consistently, and then they don't get the benefit that they were hoping or expecting from it. So whether we're talking about technology to help you internally or technology to help you automate things with clients, either way, we have to be systematic or disciplined about it if we want it to work as effectively as it's advertised, frankly. So that's a lot of what we need to do in order to prepare for the automation. What happens a lot of times is shiny object syndrome, right? We get really excited about the Zapier or the automated emails for my practice management or the whatever automation, pick your automation. And those are, which we should, those are really great tools. But if we're just going to buy them and then not use them effectively, they're really just a waste of money. And so I want to impress upon people the idea that if you want to get the most out of your money for that software and you want to get the benefit, then we need to step back and take a look at how we're doing things, whether they're systematic or disciplined enough to support that automation.
And speaking of tools, do you have tools that you like to use in your business? And can you kind of go into some of that? I think that's the meat,
Yeah,
of what people want to know. What works, what doesn't? I find that in my own experience, it takes so much time to research all these different tools. And so that's where somebody like you who has more experience could really shortcut that time for me.
Yeah, absolutely. So I am a huge fan of practice management software. For me and my firm, it really did change the way that I practice law. And people say that, and I'm telling you, it's true. It's not just an exaggeration. When I had my practice, the practice management software that I was using at the time, it was Clio, and it made us that much more proactive. Before we were reacting to phone calls, we were reacting to deadlines. With that practice management software, we were able to become much more proactive. And it's a whole different way to practice law and much more appealing, frankly, having done it both ways now. So I am a big fan of practice management software. When you're talking about practice management software in particular, there is no one ring to rule them all, as I say. People look for the perfect thing, like, let me buy this and I'll never have to buy anything again. it just doesn't exist. Like there's nothing out there.
Do you have, off the top of your head, do you have some of the advantages of certain ones that possibly maybe, you know, I know there's several of them, but there might be 5 that are kind of everybody has heard of.
Yeah.
And would you share, you know, what your thoughts are about those?
Yeah. So I mentioned Clio to begin with. That's one of my favorites for 2 reasons. Their tech support is excellent. I mean, if you can call them, of course. I like chatting in the chat box, and they're very responsive. And if they can't, like, if you get to a question where they're like, yeah, our software just doesn't do that, because there's limitations to all software. Usually they'll offer you some type of workaround, which I really appreciate, because of course I don't want to have to go back and recreate the wheel on anything, right? So the tech support is fantastic. It also integrates with the most other software. Clio has over 100 integrations, and I don't intend to ever use them all, but to have that ability to not feel like I'm stuck in a software, because I can now go and add on whatever features or whatever tools I want that it doesn't have, is very appealing to me. So that's one of my favorites. I will say another popular software within this area is Smokeball. And so they're a national company, obviously, but they are very popular in the Chicago area because they're based here. And so one of the really great benefits about Smokeball is that they come with a library of forms. And so if you have a very form-heavy practice, that can be very appealing. You can, of course, create your own and make your own within it as well, but that form library is very appealing to a lot of people. And so that's one of the benefits of Smokeball. A couple others that I'll mention.
What do you think about MyCase?
But I think MyCase has some really nice features. One of my concerns about MyCase is just that it doesn't have a ton of integration. So if you're already using the things it integrates with, you're in great shape. I mean, it's a great tool. It's got some really nice features. Their texting is awesome, by the way, if you haven't tried that out yet. They do offer.
Yeah, so I was just going to say that what Melanie's talking about, for anybody who may not know, is that you can use the practice management software to text, so you can really safeguard your private information, like your cell phone number, but still receive and send texts.
Absolutely, and it stores those text messages within the client file, so it's very easy to document all that. And really, what it does is a lot of attorneys will not use or don't want to use text messaging because of those issues, because they don't want people to have their cell phone number. They don't want, it's hard to save text messages when they're on your cell phone. So those are the kind of barriers that MyCase's texting feature has essentially done away with. And so now without those barriers, it makes texting communications a lot more appealing. So yeah,
Sure.
MyCase has a great texting feature, that's for sure. And then
you mentioned Practice Panther. Were you going to comment about?
Panther. I find Practice Panther and Clio and MyCase to all be very, very similar as far as how they function. You get a lot of the same functionality, maybe with the exception of that texting. So yeah, I think that the reality is as long as you're using a product that services those core functions like calendaring and contact information and task management and stuff like that, it's really more for me an issue of which one do you like better? Like
design and usability?
Which one do you find more appealing personally? Because the reality is that's the one you're going to use more. That's the one you're going to feel like, oh, I can just easily do this, that, and the other. They all operate so very similarly that I'm much more concerned about which one you find aesthetically appealing and easy to navigate, because that's the one you're going to use. So when you're looking at practice management software, as long as you're looking at, we'll call them like the most popular ones, I guess, as long as you're looking at those so that they have those core features, then you really can't go wrong. I think that the more you use it, the more benefit you're going to get out of it, no matter what software it is. Now, I will say both Clio and Practice Panther do integrate with a program called Zapier. And for those of you looking to really take advantage of automation, Zapier is a fantastic product to get to know. Zapier does go ahead and help apps work together. So for example, I can create, they call them zaps. I can create a zap that says, every time I do this in Clio, send out this email in Gmail. So it helps any of your web-based softwares work together. And a really great thing to do is I go to the Zapier website, Zapier is how you spell it. I go to the Zapier website and I look for what software I need. So if I need a new texting platform, or if I need a new mail, stamps.com kind of software, I go there and look for the software, because I know that if I pick something off that list, it's going to work with a lot of other products that I'm using. So it's a really great website to check out if you're interested in putting more automation within your practice, because a lot of the practice management software these days, we want it to be more automated than it is, frankly. And so we're looking for more ways to automate, and Zapier is a great tool to use to do that.
So Zapier, because it sounds a little abstract to me and possibly to anyone who's never used it, you're saying that you would like create an account. Is it a free app? And then you're able to tell it a rule and it will talk to the two different apps.
Correct. Yeah, it is not free. You do have to well, they have a free version that you can use just to get to know it and to get familiar with it. If you're going to be using it with any volume, you'll probably want to pay for a higher service level. But we're talking about the entry level is like $500 a year. So if you're actually having it do a lot of things, that could be well worth it. So I definitely would recommend checking it out. And if you go there, set up a free account, you can tell it what software you already use. Like I use Gmail, I use Clio, I use RingCentral, I use, all the software that I use, I can put in there, and it will start suggesting to you ways that the two programs can work together. And so it also helps kind of with that whole brainstorming of, well, I know I have all this software, but I don't know how it works together. So it's a nice tool to use to figure that out as well.
So here's an example, I think, that came to mind. You enter somebody into your case management software, and you want that then to automatically be added into your, let's say, MailChimp member list, audience list, so that you can use that as a marketing tool. So you can create a Zap to connect those two. Okay.
Yeah, so you can create a Zap that says, every time I enter a new person into my practice management, I want you to, assuming it's a practice management that integrates with Zapier, I want you to now make a new contact in my MailChimp or my whatever mailing list integrates with Zapier. So yeah, and it's those little things like that too. Like we don't always think about how much that impacts our business, but the reality is a thing like that, it's a small task. And so oftentimes it can be overlooked or not prioritized. And then we get to the end of the month or the end of the quarter, and now we want to send out a newsletter. And now we're like, we have to go back and do all the research to find out our new people. And so just by setting that up can save a lot of time and energy and make it more successful. Because again, if I have to do extra work to go find all the people now that I needed to put into my MailChimp, now that's an extra step that's going to take that I may or may not do or prioritize. So yeah, it can really help to make those little things happen in the background without having to focus on it so much. So I do want to talk, we can talk more about software, but I do also want to talk just a little bit about that background, the steps that we're going to take to make that software work. And so we've got 5 steps here that we're going to go through, and we will put them up right here. So we've got step number 1. Now, it sounds the most basic, but oftentimes can be the hardest, is you need to think through your process. And so we oftentimes say, you know what, I file a motion for modification once a week. I know exactly how to do it. And I believe you. But I also know that in order to have all this happen in the way that we want it to, we need to be very distinct and spell out those steps. So let's pretend like we have a new associate, new paralegal, something like that, and we're going to start writing out these steps for them or with them. And so better yet, have the new associate or new paralegal write them out because they're learning them anyway. So as much detail as you can include is great. We can always take detail out if we don't need it, but the more detail we have, the more helpful this stuff is going to be for training purposes, let's say. So the step 2 is to document it, and document as much detail as you can. I don't care if you put it on paper, if you put it in a digital document. There's a lot of fancy software out there for procedures that you can document it online. Again, don't get distracted by the shiny object. because the real point is to make sure it's documented so that we can share it. The format is not so important. We can always improve upon that later. Step number 3 is to train your team. We don't just want to hand them a list of steps because they may or may not be effective, right? They may read your list and say, this isn't how we do it. Or they might read your list and say, I don't understand this part. And so the more discussion or more training that we have around these steps, the more successful we're going to be. And by the way, a little bonus tip here, if you're making changes in these procedures, and this is not the way we've always done it, a really great idea is to involve them in the process and tell them the why. Why are we doing it this way? Because you're going to get a lot more buy-in from your team in order to make that happen. And so definitely sharing the why will be helpful in step 3. Step number 4, just do it. Like actually do the steps that you wrote down in the procedure. By doing that, you're going to find places where maybe you left steps off. Maybe you didn't, maybe someone misinterpreted them, so you can go in and clarify. You're going to find things that will improve upon those steps that you won't even know to think about until you're actually doing them. So we do want to actually do them, and I'm talking everyone. If you have a team, then make sure that you as the owner or you as the attorney, make sure you're doing them too, where they're indicated, because if everyone except for you is supposed to be following this procedure, it's not going to be as successful. Now, I don't mean to imply that you have to be the one licking the stamps and walking to the mailbox necessarily, but we do need to be following the procedures that have been written out for your position. And then number 5 is to track it. The brilliant thing about systematizing our firms is now we have data that we can use in order to make decisions. You know, if we're not tracking information, if we don't know how many clients we got last week or how much money those clients brought in last week, then we're really just using educated guesses, which frankly are not always so educated. A lot of times we make assumptions in those guesses that are not correct. And so the more data that we have that we can track systematically, the more we'll be able to use that data to make some really informed decisions. So build that data tracking into your steps. Go back to your steps and say, okay, when we get a new client, we're going to document it in this spreadsheet. So at the end of the month, we can just look at the spreadsheet and it's all there, right? But if we don't build that tracking into the steps, then it's not going to be as successful. Also, we want to spot check and make sure that the things are actually happening. Let's make sure that the steps are taking place the way we expected. Let's make sure we're tracking the way we expected. And if we're not, find out why. Maybe it didn't work as well as we thought it would. Maybe we got some pushback from the team. Maybe we left out a step. There's all kinds of reasons. But if we're just kind of letting it go on autopilot and not paying attention, especially at the beginning, then it could go wrong, essentially. One of my favorite things to think about is automation gone wild, right? And that's the situation where you have a process and you have some automation, but you don't support it with the underlying systems. I'm sure you've all had this scenario where your dentist texts you and says, we're excited to see you for your appointment tomorrow. And you're like, I didn't make an appointment for tomorrow because somebody put in the wrong information in the custom field or however they do their text messaging. So automation gone wild is not impressive. Automation is only impressive when it's correct. And so we want to make sure, again, I will pound in the point, that we want to make sure that we're building those underlying systems in order to create and take advantage of the automation that we're looking for. So with that said, I do have it's not technically a poll, I guess, but if you have a minute to drop it in the chat, we'd love to hear about what are some of the automations that you think would help your office the most. You know, I met a firm this morning who is sending out like more than 10 pieces of certified mail a day. And they literally have someone sitting there writing out all the green cards and writing out their addresses and everything on the envelope. And so in that scenario, I quickly identified that that was a fantastic place where we can quickly automate that process get those addresses out of the computer where they can be typed onto a form or printed onto a form and sent out very quickly. And we can probably cut that time, down by 2/3. It'll probably take them way less time than they were spending. So it's awesome to be able to brainstorm amongst each other to figure out exactly what might be helpful within your office. And sometimes we don't even think about these kind of things until we're having those kind of conversations. So if you have a minute to drop that in the poll, that would be awesome. Dana, do you have any automation in your office that you're excited about?
Well, let me get back up. Here I am. Yeah, I was just kind of typing it in too. Yes, actually, I was thinking about your question, and it's not an easy question to answer off the top of my head, because I was like, wait a minute, what do we take a lot of time doing? Mm-hmm. And that could kind of be, more efficient machine run. So it surprised me a little bit that I didn't have an answer right away. It took me a couple minutes, and it might be the same for others. But
yeah,
my example is that, I do have this process in place where they call in, they need an appointment, they need a consultation, they make an appointment for the consultation, they get an email for the appointment confirmation, then they get an email reminder. Then when they come in, if there's an engagement agreement that they want to sign, we got to send that to them. There's kind of a lot of steps of sending back and forth just to get them in.
Right.
And and that initial collection of information, I have provided them with an intake form ahead of time, wanting them to fill it out. But I'm wondering, I'm doing all of that by email now, and I'm wondering if I can even do some of that fill in form where they fill it in on their computer, and then some of it populates already in my case management.
Absolutely.
Those are some areas that come to mind for me.
And intake is a pretty popular area to start looking at. Number one, because we hope to be doing it a lot, right? We hope it's a very repetitive process. Number two, that's like a first impression, right? And if we're talking from a customer service perspective, the smoother we can make that process, the easier it's going to be to get them to say, yes, of course we want to hire you. It's been such an easy process so far. Why wouldn't we want to keep this going, And so I think that intake is a really great place to start if you're having trouble thinking of areas, and put yourself in the client's shoes. When they first contact your office, what kind of response do they get? I mean, is someone answering the phone? Is someone sending them an email? So start from the client perspective of what would be really nice if I was a client. And you're right. Would it be more appealing to me if I was a client to be able to go online and fill out the 10, 15, whatever questions that you have for me? And then that way we walk into that consultation and you're like ready to go. We're not wasting time saying, and how many brothers do you have? And how many sisters do you have? Which is all really great information for us to have before we help this client, depending on our practice area.
Sure.
But the reality is, you really don't need a law license to ask them about their family. I hope you're asking them about their family to build rapport and to, be able to have a really great conversation with the client. But to have to go down a checklist of, okay, now I asked you about your brother, what about your sister? So I feel like you're exactly right in identifying that kind of a workflow where it's very easy to imagine or to put into place, frankly, the forms that we can send out to them and they fill out, and then it automatically comes back and populates in our practice management software. And then we use that data to create documents further on down the line. So it's definitely a great workflow to start looking at. Intake is fantastic. Another one I find that people don't always think about is document preparation. So people think, well, you know what, I have this, every time I file with the court, I have to fill out this court form. It's always the same court form, but we fill out different information, obviously. Those are great places to start with document automation. If you're having to type in your client's name anyway, why not just type it in once to your practice management, have it populate into a document 10 times throughout the case? And of course, the name is just a very basic example, but the more information we can get into a system like that and be able to use it in multiple different ways, creating documents, adding to our mailing list, all those kind of different things that we can do with it from just entering it in once is going to.
Yeah, I think, adding to the mailing list, marketing is something that a lot of attorneys spend the least amount of time doing, as a priority. It comes behind your client and casework.
Mm-hmm.
And automating that system could probably really benefit you by saving that time, and you're still doing it.
Exactly. I have a similar story with, I'm not doing currently any newsletters, but I do post on social media. And so, it used to be, I don't have time to post on all these different platforms. I mean, if I can keep up with Facebook, I'm lucky, right? And so, but just by getting a simple tool, well, I shouldn't call it simple, it's quite robust, but by getting a tool like Meet Edgar, or the one we're using now, which of course,
Hootsuite, something like that.
Thank you, Hootsuite. Just by getting a tool like that, now my distribution is that much greater, right? So now I go in and put one post in, and it's, it feels like I'm flooding the internet. I'm sure only a handful of people see it, but but it feels like I have this much bigger distribution now with the same amount of time. I'm still only writing one post, right? It takes me a couple minutes, I get it in there. But now it's going out to 10 places as opposed to the one that it was doing before.
Yeah. Oh, and we love that feeling of productivity.
Exactly.
There's one comment that I wanted to touch on. And then I also just wanted to give, the hold up the card, the 5 minute, it's only about 4 minute warning now. So sure. Within the last 4 or 5 minutes, if you wanted to really zone in on certain tips or takeaways that you want the viewers to walk away with, as far as, let me make sure I tell you about this tool or concentrate on this, whatever. Yeah. I want to give you that opportunity because I know sometimes people do have to leave right at the top of the hour.
Sure.
But we will be extending the webinar just a few more minutes, while Melanie talks about the other things she wanted to. And if anybody had any questions, of course, we will try to answer those as well. Yep. The comment that I wanted to bring up to your attention was someone asked about transactional documents and whether they can automatically change or adjust details after the person inputting answers a few project-specific questions, right? So you have a document, and do you know of a system out there that would maybe adjust the field based on, pop-up questions?
Yes. So there are many. The one in particular I'll mention because it's very often overlooked and you may already have it. So Clio's document automation software will do that. Well, what you're describing we call conditional logic, right? So if I check this box, then put this paragraph in the document. If I, check this box, put this paragraph in the document. So it really does help you to personalize those documents, even the transactional ones. So for example, I just yesterday put into Clio a purchase and sale agreement for real estate, right? And so we had an area for the purchase price, of course, and all that. But we also had terms like, is it on public or private water and sewer? And then obviously, depending on the answer, it would change the paragraph. So definitely that can be accommodated by a number of different software. What I will caution you about is there's also software out there that calls itself document automation software, but doesn't have that conditional logic ability. And so that can be very frustrating to purchase the software expecting that it can do that and then find out that it can't. So if you are shopping for document automation software, I would definitely, that would be one of the questions that I would want to ask of the service provider because, like I said, there's just a bunch out there that doesn't. So in fact, most of the practice management software included document automation with the exception of Clio, does not have conditional logic. Now, if you're looking for the piece where your client could answer the questionnaire, because typically with Clio, you're the internal person, the paralegal, somebody like that would be answering these questions. If you wanted your client to be able to do that, then that can be accommodated as well. There are a number of form tools that you can attach to your practice management software, depending on what you have. But if you have a Zapier practice management software that works with Zapier and a form tool that works with Zapier, then you can have your client fill out that form, send the information to the practice management, and then have that document populated. So there are ways that we can accomplish that. It's going to depend a lot on what the software that you already have versus the software that you're willing to invest in. And of course, you guys are all familiar with Hot Docs, I'm sure. And so the Hot Docs is a fantastically robust automation tool, but it has its limitations. Like, it doesn't integrate with a lot of other software. And so maybe you already have Hot Docs, and so you're perfectly fine, with the double data entry as long as you can use their forms or whatever. That's fine. But just know the limitations of the software that you're trying to buy. And some of the great questions to ask for document automation software is, can they handle conditional logic? And does it integrate with anything else, like a form tool or like a practice management software?
And in our closing minutes, do you have those, your tips and tricks to tell?
Yeah, my tips and tricks are, it's not rocket science. Use the software you already have, because chances are it can do a lot more than you're using it for without you having to pay a lot more money.
Okay, and how do we figure that out?
Oh, that's a great question. So most of the software out there these days have a lot of online resources, videos, tech support hotlines, whatever. If you're stuck and you're in a bind and you just don't know where to go, call us. We're happy to help. I mean, at Streamlined.legal, we help firms all the time use the software that they already have or integrate it with something new that solves their problem. So we're happy to help you figure that out as well.
Okay, perfect. And I want to say we here at the Friendly Lawyers are all about collaboration. So the idea is, when we get together, we put our guards down, we share our secrets in an effort to try and help one another. So those sorts of conversations are absolutely welcome in all of our events and all of our functions. So we are and we hope to be a good resource for that reason.
Absolutely.
Well, if there aren't any other questions that come through in the chat in the next few minutes, I just want to take this moment to thank you, Melanie, for joining us today and sharing your expertise.
Thank you.
I'm sure everybody got something out of it, and probably a whole lot more. I certainly did.